Welcome everybody, my name is James and this is part of a series called the CBT Files. Today we'll be looking at something called behavioural activation and some of the underpinning theory. So our journey starts with Charles Foerster. Charles Foerster was one of the first psychologists to use Skinner's work to explain depression. So Skinner came up with operant conditioning, a theory based around what increases and reduces people's behaviour. So what Foerster did is he used those principles to see why people were getting depressed. And one of the main things that he looked at was how people who were depressed had less positive reinforcement from their environment. Foerster also brought along the techniques from behavioural approaches, such as something called the triple contingency, or what we call in CBT a behavioural ABC. This is where we break down a behaviour into its antecedent, so that's what just came before the behaviour itself, what was done, and the consequence. So starting to understand what's reinforcing a behaviour. So firstly I want to just briefly explain operant conditioning and what conditioning theory really involves. So this is the basis for behavioural activation. We start with reinforcements. So this is anything that increases a behaviour. Let's start with positive reinforcement. So this is anything that increases a behaviour by giving a positive reward following it. So for instance, you might be driving along in your car, you let someone out and they wave to you as they pass, and this makes you feel good. So this would be a positive reinforcer and something that was likely to increase the behaviour. Negative reinforcement is similar in the fact that it increases a behaviour. However, negative reinforcement is where a behaviour is paired with the removing of a stimulus. So for instance, if you're driving along and you start to hear ringing and a noise coming from your car because your seatbelt isn't on, that might be quite aversive to you. The sound might become louder as it carries on, and therefore you'll put the seatbelt on to stop the noise. This is called negative reinforcement because you're more likely to do that in the future rather than let the sound start. Punishment, on the other hand, is anything that kind of reduces behaviour. If we add in punishment, so for instance, if I let people out but when I get to work I'm late because I've let so many people out and I get shouted at, I'm less likely to do that behaviour in the future. Similarly, in extinction, behaviour is reduced by the removing of a positive behaviour. Instead of adding something in, something is taken away. When this positive reinforcer is taken away, so for instance if we're talking about driving again, if people stopped praising me and waving their hand for each time I let them out, this could lead to extinction, which is where a behaviour is no longer done. Foerster was extremely influential in bringing the principles of behaviourism into mental health. He looked at those principles of conditioning to further understand depression. Now we're going to look at Peter Lewison. So what he did is he used these principles to try and create a treatment for patients. He really honed in on the idea of positive reinforcement, and what he did is he started to collect things from the environment that are naturally reinforcing and then tried to put this into a treatment program where he tried to get people who were depressed to go out and do these activities. This made sense based on the model. However, what they actually found is that for some people this didn't help and there was something more going on. This brings us to Christopher Martel. So before this we had events being put in to make people feel better. But unfortunately, the research didn't back up Lewison's approach. They found that some people were still feeling depressed even though they were doing these positive behaviours. So what Martel started to do was break down problems into primary and secondary problems. He found from the literature that primary problems might make someone feel depressed, so that could be a loss or bereavement that takes away positive reinforcers. This could be a good friend who you might have lost who used to make you feel good. Or it could be a change in circumstances, so someone who loses their job, who used to get rewarded with achievement from that job. What Martel did was he created a model that was suited for each person. So he said that actually you can't create a list of things that are reinforcing, because for each person that's going to be unique what reinforces them. He also said that it was secondary problems that keep depression going. So a primary problem could be a loss, bereavement, change in circumstances, but a secondary problem is where unfortunately we try and get aversive control over situations, and this is where we feel better by escaping or avoiding problems. And this leads into secondary problems, because in the long term these avoidances and escape behaviours make things harder to deal with and stop us getting towards the goals that we want.